When you're setting up a little home workshop, the first thing that makes you pause is that feeling that the tool you're eyeballing might be either a game changer or a money sink. I remember scrolling through a dozen lathe options, trying to picture myself actually turning a piece of brass rod for a custom lampshade, only to wonder if the machine would be sturdy enough or if it would just sit there, humming, while the workpiece wobbles. If you're in that exact spot, the link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What I found with the Proxxon Precision Lathe PD250/E is that it sits in that sweet spot for people who need a machine that can handle steel, brass, and aluminium in a modest size range, but don't have a full-scale metal shop at home. It's not a giant industrial lathe that will dominate a garage, and it's not a cheap hobbyist model that shudders every time you start a cut. It's a compact, benchtop unit that promises quiet and powerful operation, and that promise holds up when you actually put it through a few real-world projects. Let's talk about the first thing most people notice, the setup. The box arrives with the lathe head, a motor, a small collection of collets, a tailstock, and a few basic tools. Unpacking feels almost like assembling a Lego kit for adults. Nothing's missing, and the instructions are clear enough that you can get the spindle turning in under 15 minutes. That matters because you don't want to spend an entire afternoon just trying to get the machine to run. Once the motor is plugged in, the lathe starts up with a surprisingly low noise level. You'll hear a soft whir, not the roar you'd expect from a 250mm workpiece capacity machine. That quietness isn't just nice for the ears. It means you can run it in a shared space without bothering neighbors or family members. Now, the real test is how precise it actually is when you start shaping metal. I ran a quick project turning a 100mm length of aluminium bar into a tapered spindle for a small electric motor. The lathe's quick change chuck made swapping the workpiece painless, and the spindle speed range gave enough control to keep the cut smooth. After a few passes, the finished taper was within 1/10 of a millimeter of the dimensions I was aiming for. That kind of repeatability is what makes the precise working claim feel genuine. If you're the type who cares about tolerances for things like model engine parts or custom jewelry components, you'll appreciate that level of steadiness. One of the hidden trade-offs shows up when you start pushing the machine toward its limits. The maximum workpiece length is 250mm, which is plenty for most hobby projects. But if you ever need to turn something longer, say a decorative rod for a curtain tieback, you'll quickly run into the edge of the bed. The tailstock can be positioned, but the overall travel is still constrained. That's not a deal breaker for most makers, but it's worth flagging before you buy if you anticipate larger pieces. Another practical nuance is the motor's power. It's described as quiet and powerful, and for steel or brass up to a few centimeters in diameter, the torque is adequate. However, if you plan to take on thicker steel stock, you'll notice the spindle slowing down under load. In those moments, you either have to reduce the cut depth or accept a slower material removal rate. It's a classic balance between a compact footprint and raw horsepower. Who should buy this lathe? If you're a hobbyist who already has a basic set of hand tools and you're looking to add turning to your skill set, the Proxxon PD250/E fits nicely. It works well for educational purposes. Think a high school engineering club or a makerspace that wants a low-maintenance machine that won't dominate the room. It's also a solid pick for makers who need to produce small batches of parts. Think custom knobs, small gear blanks, or prototype fittings. Because it's quiet, you can even run it in an apartment without worrying about complaints from the next door. Who should skip it? If you're a professional machinist who needs to crank out large diameter steel shafts or run long production runs, this lathe will feel underpowered and cramped. The same goes for anyone who expects a benchtop lathe to replace a full-size floor model for heavy-duty work. The vibration-free claim holds true for the range it's designed for, but once you start forcing it beyond that, you'll feel a bit of chatter. That's not a defect, it's a sign that you've hit the design envelope. A practical strength that often gets lost in the spec sheet is the low maintenance requirement. The motor runs on a standard 230V supply, and there's no need for a separate coolant system. After a few weeks of use, a quick wipe down of the spindle and a check of the belt tension kept everything humming smoothly. The collet set that comes in the box,